and our general practices are and will remain the mainstay of provision of care for a whole range of illnesses. So we're working closely to make sure that they can do so.
I just remind them as well that even though they're an essential service and open, if they have had a decline in business over this period, they will be eligible for the wage subsidy as well.
Please, Dr. Bloomfield, are you worried about staffing levels at the Southern DHB?
Not at the Southern DHB. I think there was a question about staffing levels at Invercargill Hospital where I think 11 staff members had to go off duty. I'm not concerned at the moment if I think about the overall staffing there, and also I know that the Southern DHB will be looking at if they need to provide other staff from Dunedin to support them at the moment.
Okay, thank you everyone.
Right, good afternoon, kia ora koutou everybody. I'm going to run through a few details of the government's distance learning announcement for you all, then happy to take some questions, and then if we have time and there is an appetite for it, happy to do a little bit of show and tell at the end. I want to make it clear before I do that I drove myself to work today. I have remained in my bubble and intended to do so all the way home again this afternoon. So over the last couple of weeks, the Ministry of Education's been working very hard to make sure that we've got, and working with partners to make sure that we've got support for young people to continue their learning from home when Term 2 begins on the 15th of April. That's next Wednesday, 1 week from today. I want to emphasise up front that we're still working to the 4-week lockdown timetable, but we're planning for a whole variety of scenarios at the end of that. It's important that even at the end of that time, young people are able to continue to learn from home if they need to do so. So that means in education, we will be developing robust distance learning infrastructure, a much more resilient system so that learners can receive education in any scenario, and so that parents can receive the type of support that they need in order to support learning at home. So our goal is to make sure that all families have access to at least one learning channel from home from the time that Term 2 starts next Wednesday. Ministry of Education surveyed all of the schools to see how prepared they are to support learning from home. Around half are very well set up for distance learning using the internet already, and we're taking action to ensure that there are new connections and resources available to all schools. We're anticipating a number of short-term logistical challenges, as you might imagine, with device availability and connectivity. So our plan's a pretty broad one, and there are 4 main channels to make sure that we are covering all learners throughout the country. First, we're focused on increasing the number of students who have access to the internet at home and have access to devices at home. Second, we will be delivering hard copy packs of materials for different age groups and different year levels. Third, we have almost concluded arranging for 2 television channels to be broadcasting education-related content for at least a month. One will be in English and the other will be in Māori. And we are working to ensure that we're also providing content for Pacifica and other communities. And the fourth is making sure that we've got more resources available for parents, particularly online, but also connecting them up with learning support, additional learning support resource remotely where their children have additional learning needs. So supporting all of that, we've got a strong focus on professional development and support for the teaching and school leadership community to make sure that they can support remote learning. To fund all of that, we fast-tracked immediate emergency funding of $88.7 million, and it's likely that further funding will be required. I want to make it clear here that devices and materials will be delivered in waves. We estimate that there are around 80,000 households in New Zealand with children in them that don't have access to the internet at the moment, and we're not going to be able to have all of that resolved on day one, and we're also not going to be able to have hard pack materials to every home on day one. So the materials will be delivered in waves, and bear in mind that the work the ministry is doing and the resources the ministry is supplying is to supplement what schools are already doing. Many schools have already been supplying materials to their families so that young people can continue to work from home. The ministry is following very closely public health advice in the distribution of all resources. As I'm sure you can imagine, it's a very big and complex piece of work covering thousands and thousands of households, and it's being done at high speed. There are some constraints, as you can imagine, on the stock of equipment that we have in the country. So not everybody who needs internet access or digital devices will be able to get them, and that's why we've also put the emphasis on hard packs as well. We are having to prioritise and sequence the delivery of support because we're unable to make sure that we get things to every household on day one. Our initial focus is on connecting up senior secondary school students who are working towards the NCEA because we want to minimise the amount of disruption that they experience. And then we are also working to deal with the areas where there is the greatest need. And we are going to move our way down through the schooling system and through to early learning from that point onwards. So while we're getting packs printed and delivered, while we're getting devices and connections underway, we also want to beam content into people's households through broadcast. They will start on the 15th of April, and at least a month at this stage, but we have the ability to extend that if we need to. We expect around 6.5 hours of content will be broadcast every day. At different times of the day, different age groups will be targeted. There'll be material for early learners, for schools, which will include things like wellbeing, numeracy, literacy, science, movement, music and physical education. And over time, we hope to be able to supply adult learning content too if we need to. There'll be advice and guidance broadcast for parents to give them ideas and inspiration as to how they can support the learning that's taking place in the home. We're in touch with a number of well-known Kiwi presenters and others who'll be fronting the broadcasts and helping to provide that specialist content. So to wrap all of that up, I want to emphasise that public health is remaining front and centre in the work that we are doing. As families, learners and schools are increasingly focused on preparations for term 2, we do want to reassure people that we're mobilising all of the resources that we have available as fast as we can to prepare for all of the different possible scenarios that may eventuate at the end of this 4-week lockdown period. I want to acknowledge all of the people at the Ministry of Education and all of the suppliers who have been working very hard to make sure that they have been able to pull these resources together at short notice. We've received, just by way of context, over 100 offers of help from different businesses around the country and who are offering to supply resources and help to put these packs together. So I'm very happy to take your questions and then I can go through some of the materials should you wish, Tova.
Minister, how many children don't have devices and how many still won't have a device after you ship out the first 17,000?
So we understand it's around 80,000 households, more children than that, so it's in the early 100,000 plus number in terms of the number of children, because obviously some of those households have more than one child in them. And we've managed to locate and source around 17,000 devices to purchase or lease. And so those are in various stages of arriving in the country and being prepared for delivery. We're also working with schools at the moment. Many schools have a stock of devices at school, which at the moment are just sitting at school. So we're working with the schools to work out how we can safely access those devices, have them appropriately cleaned if they need to be, serviced if they need to be, and then potentially have those delivered to families as well. So that potentially increases that number. Because we don't have a definitive number of devices we'll be able to get back out of schools, I can't give you a final total, but as I've said, our goal is to make sure that all families have at least one channel of learning support available from the 15th.
Undeniably more difficult to focus on a web stream than a real person. Are you expecting a dip in the NCEA results?
Look, I think it's very early to sort of speculate about that. We've been doing a lot of work over the last 4 or 5 years to move NCEA progressively to an online environment anyway. So over the last few years, students have been, an increasing number of students have been sitting their exams online, for example, and the overall vision there is to get NCEA assessment to the point where it's available when it's needed, rather than having, you know, a block of exams at the end of every year. I think that, you know, I know schools will be pulling out all of the stops to ensure that this disruption doesn't have too bigger an impact on students' overall learning, and that will include potentially some catch-up later in the year if that's needed.
Could the style of learning continue?
You go, Charlie.
Could the style of learning continue once we exit alert level 4, or will kids be able to return back to school once we go into those lower level 3, for example, alert levels?
So the Ministry of Education and me, we're very actively engaged in the planning beyond level 4 lockdown in terms of what happens there. And we're working through all of the different scenarios. I do want to say that when level 4 ends, people should not assume that that means that schools and early childhood services will all automatically reopen on day 1. And so we're working through all of the different scenarios around how you would reopen the education system and under what circumstances some parts of that system may stay closed. So hence we're doing all the work we need to do to support learning from home for as long as we need to support it. Obviously we want to have kids back in you know, face-to-face learning environment as soon as we can, but I can't put a fixed time frame on that. That's why we're putting all this emphasis onto making sure that we're planning for every scenario.
Parents will be counting down right now, especially maybe if they've got multiple kids at home, until schools open again. What's your message to them?
Look, I do want to acknowledge, and I am in this situation myself, that being at home with your kids all day, every day, and not really able to go out anywhere can be incredibly challenging. I do want to acknowledge as we come out of lockdown and many of those families start to see one or more members of the adult community in that household going back to work, that's going to create additional pressures on them as well. So we're working through all of those scenarios. We've